Paul Newman had the bluest eyes in Hollywood, but what he saw in women went far deeper than beauty. After decades of fame, temptation, and standing beside the most stunning faces ever put on film, Paul Newman revealed something unexpected: his personal list of the 8 most beautiful women of all time. Not because they were flawless, but because they were unforgettable. Stay with us and subscribe, because this list isn't about looks. It's about the kind of beauty that stays with you long after the room goes quiet. Joanne Woodward, the beauty that kept him home. Paul Newman spent his life surrounded by beauty. Not imagined beauty, not exaggerated beauty, but the kind that followed him everywhere, across red carpets, film sets, hotel bars, and private rooms where temptation waited patiently, confident it would eventually win. Hollywood expected him to fall. Everyone did, because men like Paul Newman didn't stay faithful. They were admired, desired, forgiven, and excused. But Paul Newman went home. And that decision, repeated quietly for 50 years, began with one woman. Joanne Woodward. She didn't stop a room when she entered it. She didn't announce herself with glamour or spectacle. There was no explosion of attention, no collective intake of breath. At first glance, she was simply attractive. But Paul noticed something unsettling. The more time you spent with her, the more difficult it became to look away. Her beauty didn't arrive all at once. It revealed itself slowly, patiently, almost unwillingly. The kind of beauty that waits until you're paying attention for the right reasons. Paul once tried to explain it, searching for words that never quite fit. He said her beauty wasn't loud, it was permanent. Not the kind that peaks under perfect lighting, then fades when the spotlight moves on. But something anchored deeper. Something structural. A beauty that held its shape through time, stress, grief, disappointment, and age. Joanne Woodward didn't orbit Paul Newman's fame. She stood beside it. She was an Oscar winner before he was. An actress with sharp intelligence, disciplined craft, and zero interest in being decorative. Paul admired that. He admired that she was beautiful without needing to be defined by it. And in an industry addicted to surfaces, that kind of woman was dangerous, because she couldn't be reduced. Their marriage wasn't a fairy tale. Correct? To bent. It suffered. Paul drank. Hollywood tempted. And then tragedy arrived, the death of their son, Scott. A grief heavy enough to break almost anything built on illusion. But through all of it, Paul's way of looking at Joanne never changed. Friends noticed it years later, long after the headlines had moved on. They'd catch him watching her across a room, not with nostalgia, not with regret, but with awe. Not for who she had been, but for who she was right then. Older, wiser, marked by life. Paul didn't love Joanne despite time. He loved her because of it. While Hollywood chased youth like a vanishing currency, Paul discovered something rarer, a beauty that deepened instead of disappearing. When people quoted his famous line, "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" they missed the point entirely. That wasn't arrogance. It was gratitude. Because Paul Newman didn't stay faithful because he was blind to beauty. He stayed faithful because he finally understood it. Joanne Woodward wasn't the most beautiful woman he ever saw. She was the one who taught him what beauty actually was. Grace Kelly. Silence in a loud room. Paul Newman met Grace Kelly at a moment when Hollywood was at its loudest. Film sets buzzed with chaos. Voices overlapping, egos colliding, assistants rushing, cameras rolling, everyone performing urgency. It was a world built on volume. And then Grace Kelly walked into it. She didn't compete with the noise. She didn't rise above it. The noise simply fell away. Paul noticed it immediately, that strange stillness that followed her. As if the room recalibrated itself around her presence. Grace Kelly didn't demand attention. She absorbed it. While other actresses worked to be seen, sharper entrances, bigger gestures, louder charm, Grace moved with an effortless composure that felt almost unnatural in Hollywood. Paul once struggled to explain it. She looked like silence in a loud room. Not absence, not emptiness, but control. Grace's beauty wasn't restless. It didn't seek validation from the camera or the crowd. It existed independently. What struck Paul most wasn't her face, though it was flawless, but the way her beauty seemed unchanged by circumstance. Perfect lighting or harsh daylight. On set or in the cafeteria. In costume or out of it. Grace Kelly looked exactly the same. Elegant. Untouchably composed. Most beautiful women, Paul believed, were enhanced by Hollywood. Grace Kelly made Hollywood feel excessive. She carried herself with a dignity that couldn't be manufactured. A quiet authority that came from upbringing, discipline, and an inner certainty about who she was. Raised with strict values, she brought an old-world restraint to an industry obsessed with exposure. And that restraint made her magnetic. Paul sensed something else too, something prophetic. Grace didn't behave like a movie star trying to become royalty. She behaved like someone who was always meant for it. When she left Hollywood to become Princess of Monaco, many called it a fairy tale ending. Paul saw it differently. To him, it felt inevitable. Grace Kelly wasn't escaping fame. She was ascending into a role that finally matched her nature. Paul once remarked that she was the only actress he'd ever known who seemed more natural as a princess than as a star. That wasn't flattery. It was observation. Her beauty wasn't performative. It didn't fluctuate with mood or environment. It didn't rely on seduction. It was consistent. And consistency, Paul believed, was the rarest form of beauty. Grace Kelly represented something almost paradoxical. An American woman who embodied democratic grace while possessing an inherent nobility that made monarchy feel earned rather than imposed. She didn't conquer attention. She stabilized it. In a world that rewarded excess, Grace Kelly was powerful precisely because she never needed to reach. For Paul Newman, her beauty wasn't just physical. It was alignment. The rare harmony between inner character and outer presence, where nothing felt exaggerated, forced, or out of place. Grace Kelly didn't glow. She held. And when she left Hollywood behind, she didn't diminish. She simply became more herself. Elizabeth Taylor, the woman who detonated rooms. If Grace Kelly was silence, Elizabeth Taylor was impact. She didn't enter a room. She detonated it. Paul Newman felt it every time Elizabeth Taylor appeared, that sudden shift in gravity, the way attention snapped toward her whether people wanted it to or not. She didn't ask to be noticed. She happened. Her beauty was impossible to ignore, but what unsettled Paul wasn't her famous violet eyes. It was the energy behind them. Elizabeth didn't project perfection. She projected presence. Where other actresses cultivated distance, Elizabeth closed it. She wanted to be experienced up close, felt, reacted to, remembered. Her beauty wasn't polite. It was confrontational. She owned it completely, daring the world to look away while knowing it couldn't. Paul admired that fearlessness. In an industry built on careful control, studio contracts, polished images, curated scandals, Elizabeth Taylor lived without filters. Her life unfolded publicly, messily, unapologetically. Multiple marriages, health crises, weight changes, public heartbreak. None of it hidden. None of it denied. Paul found that honesty arresting. He called her volcanic, beautiful in a way that burned. Where many stars of her era tried desperately to freeze themselves in time, Elizabeth embraced movement. Change didn't scare her. Aging didn't weaken her. Each phase of her life became part of the performance. Paul once said Elizabeth Taylor was the only star he knew who seemed to enjoy getting older. Not because she lost beauty, but because she gained freedom. She refused to disappear when Hollywood's youth obsession moved on. She stayed visible, powerful, relevant, commanding attention not through illusion, but through sheer force of character. Elizabeth didn't protect her beauty. She used it. And when it faded, she didn't mourn it. She integrated what came next. That courage mattered to Paul. Because beauty without bravery, he believed, was fragile. Elizabeth Taylor showed him something different. That true beauty could withstand exposure, criticism, and time, and still emerge stronger. She didn't shrink to remain desirable. She expanded. For Paul Newman, Elizabeth wasn't just a beautiful woman. She was proof that authenticity could be more magnetic than perfection. That vulnerability, when owned, becomes power. That a woman doesn't lose beauty by living loudly. She transforms it. Sophia Loren, the woman who made men irrelevant. When Sophia Loren entered a room, something curious happened. Men didn't lean forward. They leaned back. Not because she demanded space, but because she already occupied it. Paul Newman felt it the first time he worked with her. Sophia didn't perform confidence. She arrived with it fully formed. Her beauty was obvious, striking, sensual, unmistakably womanly, but that wasn't what held Paul's attention. What fascinated him was how little she seemed to care whether anyone approved of it. Sophia Loren carried herself like someone who had already decided she was enough. She didn't shrink. She didn't soften. She didn't translate herself for American comfort. Her accent remained. Her curves remained. Her Italian identity remained intact, unapologetic and unedited. In a Hollywood that encouraged international actresses to dilute themselves into palatable versions of beauty, Sophia did the opposite. She expanded. Paul once said she had the kind of face that makes you forget your own name. But it wasn't distraction, it was disarmament. Sophia didn't seduce by invitation. She seduced by presence. She was powerful without aggression, sensual without calculation, intellectual without defensiveness. Every gesture felt grounded, as if her beauty was simply one expression of a fully integrated self. Paul noticed something else too. Sophia wasn't afraid to use her face. While many beautiful actresses guarded their image, careful smiles, controlled expressions, flawless composure, Sophia laughed openly, cried without restraint, allowed herself to look messy, tired, even aged if the role demanded it. She was an actress first. A beauty second. That mattered to Paul. Because beauty that needs protection, he believed, is already in danger. Sophia Loren's beauty didn't need defending. It wasn't fragile. She could be powerful without dominating. Sensual without being consumed by desire. Visible without seeking validation. Paul once remarked that when Sophia walked into a room, every man became irrelevant. Not because she rejected them, but because she didn't need them. Her confidence didn't push outward. It stood still. And everything else adjusted around it. For Paul Newman, Sophia Loren represented a distinctly European understanding of beauty, one that valued maturity over youth, depth over decoration, and self-possession over approval. She didn't resist time. She partnered with it. Her beauty didn't peak. It accumulated. Sophia Loren wasn't unforgettable because she was stunning. She was unforgettable because she was whole. Audrey Hepburn, the woman who floated. After Brigitte Bardot, Audrey Hepburn felt like a whisper. Not because she was smaller, but because she moved differently through the world. Paul Newman noticed it immediately. Where other women entered a room and altered its temperature, Audrey altered its gravity. People leaned in without realizing they were doing it. She didn't command attention. She invited it. In an era obsessed with curves, sensuality, and overt desire, Audrey Hepburn looked almost out of place. Slender frame. Delicate features. A presence that seemed to hover rather than land. Hollywood wasn't sure what to do with her. Studio executives worried she was too thin. Too unusual. Too far from the bombshell ideal that dominated the 1950s. Paul saw something else entirely. He saw depth. Audrey's eyes held a strange contradiction, vulnerability paired with wisdom, innocence shaped by experience. They looked like they had seen another world. And in a way, they had. Her childhood during the war left marks that glamour couldn't erase. But instead of hardening her, those experiences gave her a rare gentleness. One that never felt fragile, only precise. Paul admired that humility. Audrey didn't use beauty as leverage. She didn't flirt for power. She didn't weaponize her appearance. She downplayed it. While others leaned into their status as icons, Audrey redirected attention toward meaning. Her work, her craft, her humanitarian mission. She seemed almost embarrassed by admiration, as if beauty were something incidental rather than central. Paul once said she didn't walk through a room. She floated. Most beautiful women, he observed, moved as if aware of the effect they created. Audrey moved as if the effect had never crossed her mind. That absence of self-consciousness was mesmerizing. As time passed, Audrey didn't fight change. She didn't chase preservation. She allowed herself to evolve. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. While many stars disappeared when youth faded, Audrey became more present. More herself. Her beauty transformed from appearance into purpose. Paul believed she was the only beautiful woman he knew who became more with age, not less. Because what defined Audrey was never surface level. Her beauty wasn't something she wore. It was something she expressed, through kindness, restraint, dignity, and compassion. For Paul Newman, Audrey Hepburn represented beauty as character made visible. The rare alignment where outer grace reflects inner truth, without distortion, exaggeration, or performance. She didn't shine. She endured. Brigitte Bardot, the hypnotic rule breaker. Brigitte Bardot didn't arrive to change the rules. She behaved as if they had never existed. Paul Newman never worked directly with her, but he didn't need to. Everyone in cinema felt the shift the moment Bardot appeared on screen. Something old cracked. Something carefully constructed collapsed. Before Bardot, beauty was managed. After Bardot, beauty escaped. She didn't look polished. She looked undone. Hair tousled. Makeup minimal. Movement loose, unchoreographed, almost careless. And that was the point. Paul once said she had a raw, uncontained quality, like the camera had accidentally captured someone living instead of performing. Where other actresses appeared hyper-aware of being watched, Bardot moved like she had forgotten the audience entirely. She wasn't asking for approval. She wasn't offering herself to be judged. She existed inside her own experience. That alone made her revolutionary. In And God Created Woman, Bardot didn't present sexuality as something refined, controlled, or packaged for consumption. She presented it as natural, impulsive, playful, unapologetic. Paul recognized the danger in that. Not danger to men, danger to an entire system built on female restraint. Bardot's beauty wasn't elegant. It was free. And freedom is always disruptive. She broke the illusion that beauty required discipline, posture, or permission. She suggested something radical, that a woman could be desirable without being composed, powerful without being strategic, beautiful without being careful. Paul admired how unfiltered she was. She didn't protect her image because she didn't have an image. She had presence. Bardot's influence spread beyond film. Hair, fashion, makeup, the entire visual language of femininity shifted in her wake. The Bardot look wasn't constructed in studios. It was copied from life. Tousled hair, bare skin, eyes that suggested thought rather than invitation. Paul saw in Bardot a future arriving early. A woman whose beauty didn't belong to anyone else's expectations. A woman who didn't perform for desire, she generated it. Her beauty wasn't timeless in the classical sense. It was timely, perfectly aligned with a moment when women were beginning to claim autonomy over how they were seen. Paul Newman believed Bardot didn't just redefine beauty. She exposed it. Stripped of polish. Stripped of obedience. Stripped of artifice. What remained wasn't perfection. It was freedom. And for Paul, that made her unforgettable. Lauren Bacall, the most dangerous woman in a cocktail dress. Lauren Bacall didn't need to be loud. She was dangerous in stillness. Paul Newman noticed it immediately, that unsettling confidence that made people pause before speaking. Bacall didn't fill space. She claimed it. From her very first appearance on screen, she moved with a certainty most actors never reach in a lifetime. Chin lowered. Eyes lifted. Voice slowed deliberately, as if time itself needed to adjust to her rhythm. She wasn't asking to be liked. She was deciding what would be tolerated. Paul admired that. In an era when young actresses were encouraged to appear eager, malleable, and grateful, Lauren Bacall arrived fully formed. Even at 19, opposite Humphrey Bogart, she projected authority, not innocence. Her beauty wasn't soft. It wasn't inviting. It was strategic. Every look felt intentional. Every pause carried weight. She understood something many beautiful women were never taught, that restraint could be more commanding than exposure. Paul once said she could unnerve you with a single glance. And it was true. Bacall didn't rely on traditional femininity. She didn't flirt for leverage or smile for approval. Her power came from intelligence, wit, and an unshakable sense of self. She didn't try to be beautiful. She tried to win. And she did. Paul saw in Bacall a version of beauty rarely celebrated, beauty as strength made visible. A woman whose presence alone shifted dynamics, challenged men, and refused to shrink to make others comfortable. She wasn't decorative. She was decisive. In her performances, Bacall consistently portrayed women with agency, characters who stood their ground, spoke with clarity, and set boundaries without apology. That mattered, because Paul believed beauty without autonomy was incomplete. Lauren Bacall didn't belong to the gaze. She controlled it. She proved that attraction didn't require submission, that a woman could be desirable precisely because she was uncompromising. For Paul Newman, Bacall represented a future arriving early. A modern woman before modern language existed for her. Her beauty didn't ask permission. It enforced terms. By MacGraw. The look of heartbreak before it happens. Ali MacGraw arrived at a moment when Hollywood was changing its mind about beauty. The polish was cracking. The illusion was thinning. Audiences were tired of perfection and hungry for something that felt real. Ali didn't look manufactured. She looked found. Paul Newman encountered her during this transition, the early 1970s, when glamour gave way to vulnerability and beauty began to mean something different. Ali MacGraw didn't protect herself from the camera. She opened to it. Her face carried emotion without disguise. Joy, doubt, fear, love. Everything surfaced immediately, unfiltered. Where other actresses developed a protective layer between themselves and the audience, Ali removed it entirely. Paul noticed that right away. Her beauty wasn't in flawless features. It was in transparency. She had eyes that made men rethink their lives. Not because they promised escape, but because they revealed consequence. Looking at her felt like standing on the edge of something fragile. Paul once said she looked like heartbreak before it happened. And that was her power. Ali didn't seduce with confidence or control. She connected through honesty. She allowed herself to be seen, uncertain, emotional, human. In Love Story, her breakthrough role, she became the face of a new ideal. Not the untouchable icon. Not the constructed fantasy, but the woman you believed in. Her vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was access. Audiences didn't admire Ali from a distance. They felt with her. Her beauty created intimacy, a closeness Hollywood had rarely allowed before. Paul believed this marked an evolution. Where earlier generations of beauty were built on mystery, Ali's was built on presence. She didn't hide pain. She let it exist openly. And that openness changed everything. For Paul Newman, Ali MacGraw represented the final step in his understanding of beauty, the realization that authenticity could eclipse perfection and emotional honesty could be more compelling than control. She wasn't timeless in the traditional sense. She was of her moment, and that made her unforgettable. Because beauty, Paul believed, doesn't exist outside of humanity. It exists inside it. Ali MacGraw didn't look invincible. She looked real. And in the end, that was the most radical beauty of all. Paul Newman wasn't naming the most beautiful women. He was revealing what beauty really is. Not perfection, not youth, not even desire, but character made visible. If this story changed the way you see beauty, subscribe, stay with us, and tell us in the comments, which kind of beauty stayed with you the longest?